Then,
I'm so excited.
that's creepy. Okay, are there any more?
They do the same thing.
Okay.
So it's not live, but it would be our smart.
If it's a nice looking thing that, are you artistic?
Like
Could you make one?
I'm gonna see if there would be enough money in our budget to buy one,
Okay,
because it would look nicer,
yeah.
and we don't have a lot of space. The table's just so tacky, we pack so much in there.
Yeah.
But if we just start with all new merch, it might be better.
Yeah.
That was in Theodore Roosevelt National Park. Did you see these round balls? These are naturally formed spheres that are pushing their way up, out. Here's one, there's one. That's like Siamese spheres. It was very nice, interesting to be there. And that's where we saw our biggest herd of buffalo crossing the road. As we walked down, and not as we walked, as we drove down into the park. I'd like to go back sometime and visit there in the park where Teddy Roosevelt lived. Because his ranch for North Dakota So let's have prayer and we'll begin. We'll finish out this material on the depression, and then hopefully by the end of it we won't be too depressed. Then we will be able to move on and get ready for our exam. So let's have prayer. Father, we do ask for your help as we finish out this unit and have your hand and blessing upon us, and that you would help us understand the history that we are studying and the men and women who were involved in it. Help us to be good citizens of this world and allowing you to have your hand in our lives. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. All right, farewell to the 18th Amendment. This here obviously is a picture of people who were waiting for midnight on the very day that the amendment was lifted, the Volstead Act was repealed, and alcohol could be purchased again. So, prohibition, which was lifted, legalizing the sale of beer and wine with a maximum of 3.2% alcohol. Now this has been changed in America now, in that there's really very few states that still have any restriction on this type of thing. There are a few that still have some restrictions on the alcohol content of beer and wine. December 1933, the 21st Amendment repealed prohibition was ratified. It's the only time that an amendment to the Constitution was amended out of the Constitution later on. And so, and that was one of the main arguments, that once we put it in, you can never take it out. That is not true. You can amend it in, you can amend it out, and so forth. Now, here are three individuals who you will want to know about: Charles Francis Townsend, Father Charles Conlin, and Louisiana Senator and Governor Huey P. Long. In the midterm elections, the Democratic Party won overwhelming majorities in 1934. And this meant that the House, they had 332 seats to only 103 Republicans. And in the Senate, they had 69 Democrats for only 27 Republicans. And back then, there were only 48 states. Roosevelt became the strongest modern president at this time. Several different organizations worked against him. One was the Liberty League, a coalition of conservative businessmen and disgruntled Democrats who voiced reasonable concerns about the state-dominated economy. One of the main celebrities, if you want to call him that, who was part of the Liberty League, will be Charles Lindbergh, Lucky Lindy, who had flown across the Atlantic earlier and became a well-known celebrity in America. Now, Charles Francis Townsend is another critic of Roosevelt, but these were critics from the left. He was a California physician who proposed a plan, a well-named plan, as far as any plan produced by Charles Townsend should be known as the Townsend Plan. This said that proposed to pay every American over 60, sort of like Social Security, but his plan was a little different. Every person would get $200 a month. And in 1934, that wasn't that bad of a stipend, $200 a month. If they retired and agreed to spend all the money in that month in the United States as a way of stimulating the economy. They could not save any of it. These old people would just be spendthrifts. Now, what I know about older people is that they don't like to spend $200 every month if that's what they're getting in their check. They would be trying to save some. So I don't know if that plan would have worked. Then Charles Conlin, who was an interesting person. He was a Roman Catholic priest who signed a deal with CBS to broadcast his sermons nationally. He was one of the very first radio preachers and was well known. And over time, his sermons became more and more political and radical. He offered 40 million listeners a running commentary on the Depression, its causes, and in 1935 turned on Roosevelt and the New Deal, and organized the National Union for Social Justice and advocated a powerful fascist-like state. Eventually, sometime in 1936 or 7, he will be silenced by the Pope because it is declared that he is being involved in political activities, and the priests were not supposed to do that. Louisiana Senator Huey P. Long. He was born in poverty, completed a law degree, and rose to the governorship almost miraculously. And once he got there, he became a very powerful person who required that everything be funneled through him. And he opposed the New Deal and Roosevelt as as aristocrats out of touch with the common man. And he promoted a plan to redistribute the nation's wealth with his Share Our Wealth campaign. He would be more in tune with modern Democrats who want to have a redistributive economy that sends money from the rich to the poor. He was talking about challenging Roosevelt in 1936 for the Democratic primary, after he had left the governorship and became a senator from Louisiana. But in 1935, he was assassinated at the state capitol building. Has anyone been to the state capitol building in Louisiana? No? I have, twice. And I have stuck my fingers in the bullet holes during the attack on Huey Long. Now, Huey Long was only shot once and lived for a while afterward. In fact, they did surgery on him trying to save him, but that one bullet hole created enough damage that eventually he died. But his bodyguards shot his assailant almost 80 times, nearly cutting him in half with machine guns. And it is the bullet holes on the marble walls of the Capitol building hallway that you can still see to this day if you visit it. He was losing control of the Louisiana legislature, and that's why he was in Louisiana negotiating between the Senate and the House to try and get some things passed that he was no longer able to just snap his finger and get what he wanted done. And while he was there, a young man on a Sunday afternoon who had gone there to talk to him because he was trying to get his father-in-law, who was a judge in Louisiana, thrown out. He was there to talk to him, and in some way, he was shot. Now, also, he is buried on the grounds of the Louisiana State Capitol building, and I was there with my mom years ago, and then just 2 or 3 years ago, our family visited Louisiana, and we went to see the Capitol building once again. Now, here we go. The second New Deal and the emergence of the welfare state. Now, the first New Deal, which has all of these little programs about agriculture and things of that nature, they seem to do some good, but they really weren't involved with creating a new infrastructure for the economy. And that's what this new program would work with. The Works Progress Administration, the WPA, hired the unemployed mostly in construction, but there were other areas that they were working with: the Federal Theater Project, the Federal Writers Project, the Federal Art Project. These areas employed musicians, actors, writers, and artists to be commissioned to do plays or to do writing projects that were considered to be for the public good, or to paint murals on the buildings in cities to beautify the place, or whatever, to create statues. This was done to give them work and also to encourage artistic development. The National Youth Administration worked to find clerical jobs in schools and colleges for youth aged 16 to 25. And then the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which was declared unconstitutional, was designed to try and manage how agriculture would be planned in the United States, telling farmers how much they could grow and what kind of things they could grow. Probably the most important of these were the Social Security Act, that provided an annual annuity for retirement benefits financed by taxes, that is still today one of the most ambitious programs that the government has, in which they take in taxes. And most people think that when you pay Social Security tax, that there's an account somewhere with your name on it. There is not. There are records that just say how much money you're owed, but the money that you are paying goes to fund the Social Security Administration payouts right now. And hopefully that there will be plenty of people who are younger than you when you are retiring, who are working, who will pay into the system in order for you to get some money. Because the original people who got money from the Social Security system got money who never paid in. So it was always running a deficit. Now, wealth tax was an attempt to redistribute wealth by not just taxing income, but taxing wealth. And this was declared initially unconstitutional on the basis that it is an illegal seizure of property. Then comes John Maynard Keynes. John Maynard Keynes was an economist that believed that the road to recovery was for governments to incur large deficits, sponsoring huge public works, and place large amounts of money in customers' hands. Banking Acts of 1935 gave the Federal Reserve System control over credit, helping them to stimulate the economy. Now, Wagner Act, another one of the Wagner Act was the establishment of the National Labor Relations Board to support the rights and labor of labor, and helped establish union labor as a part of the Democratic Party winning coalition. So, the Democratic sweep in 1936. As you can see, Roosevelt won 60% of the vote. That's a landslide. The Democrats renominated Roosevelt. The Republicans nominated Kansas Governor Alfred M. Landon, and I've stood at the spot at the Capitol building in Topeka, Kansas, where he accepted the nomination, because there's a plaque on the there telling me that this is the spot. The only reason why he was nominated is because he was the only Republican governor to win re-election in 1932. All the rest who were running lost to Democrats. And he didn't even win the state of Kansas when he was running for president. So clearly, he had no hope of winning. The Union Party nominated North Dakota Representative William Lemke with the support of Father Conlon. Democrats, as I mentioned, renominated Franklin Roosevelt. Roosevelt won 523 electoral votes, with Landon only getting 8. It was one of the worst trouncings of any presidential candidate. He carried only 2 states, Maine and Vermont. The Socialist Party collapsed, receiving less than 200,000 votes because most of the socialists became Democrats. And the Democratic Party controlled the House significantly. In fact, the Senate, it was 77 Democratic senators to only 19 lonely Republicans. So this is a major shift in politics. No party has been more powerful than the Democratic Party was after 1936. Except for maybe the Republicans right after during the Civil War, right after the Civil War. Now, the faltering recovery. 1938 economic progress was wiped out by a new recession. Unemployment soared to almost 20%. And Keynesian deficits were rejected as a means to stimulate the economy. Labor unrest complicated the recovery effort. Even though they said that businesses could strike, workers could strike, there wasn't a whole lot of people interested in doing that. The Congress of Industrial Organizations, formed by John L. Lewis, encouraged strikes. And a new kind of strike took place. These men are engaged in what? Olivia, what do you think these people are engaged in?
Sit down strike.
You are correct. Right there is the answer. And you see, there are also banjo strikes. There are all kinds of strikes. These people just refused to leave work. They just would sit down and have a big party, not leave the work. Now, you know, normally when people go on strike, they stay home. These people didn't leave. And it started in Goodyear Tire in Akron, Ohio, the Fisher Body Plant in Flint, Michigan, and then the big daddy of them all, General Motors, was unionized in February 1937. The last of the big motor companies and big companies to be unionized was Ford, and Ford really didn't like that. He felt offended that they would try and unionize his plant because he always paid his employees more than the average wage, but expected significant work in return for it. U.S. Steel unionized, wage boosted and restricted to a 40-hour week. Democrat support for unions was rewarded with union support for the Democrats, and that still is true today with union, at least as an organization usually supporting the Democratic candidate, although I found that in the last election cycle that just as many union workers were supporting Trump as they were the Democrats, so that could be changing. Then, a big problem with the U.S. Supreme Court. The Democratic leadership were passing laws that were constantly being declared unconstitutional by the Republican-leading conservative Supreme Court. And Roosevelt believed that the Supreme Court was out to destroy him and he wanted to change it. So Roosevelt proclaimed himself a reformer in his second inaugural address. And the Supreme Court was standing in its way. 4 conservative justices, James McReynolds, George Sutherland, William Van Denner, and Pierce Butler. 3 liberal judges, Louis Brandeis, Benjamin Cardozo, and Harlan Fiske. And 2 revolving justices, those are the ones that keep turning. The revolving justices meant that they would vote sometimes with the liberals, sometimes with the conservatives, were Chief Justice Charles Evans Hughes and Robert Owens, chipped away at the New Deal in many 5-4 decisions. Roosevelt submitted to Congress the Judiciary Reform Act. If he had done this differently, I think he might have gotten it passed. What he said was, he said that the judges were getting old and they were overworked, and he feels sorry for them. He proposed to add a new member of the court for each justice that was over 70 and would not retire. And the judges said, we aren't tired, we are vigorous. We might be old, but we don't need help. So he said any judge, once a judge turns 70, you can appoint someone else to help lighten the load. This offended the court and was resisted in Congress, failed in Congress, and Roosevelt was hurt politically by this. He couldn't even get it through a Congress that was almost, the Republicans couldn't stop it. It was that he couldn't get Democratic support behind this. I think if he would have said this, which is what I believe, there are 9 judges on the Supreme Court, and I think it should be expanded. The country is growing. there should be one judge for each of the 13 districts in the federal judiciary, so that one of the Supreme Court judges could chair each of the 13 circuits. That, I think, he could have gotten through. Forget about how old they are. Just say you want to expand it to 13 because of this reason, and that may have passed. And he would have been able to add 4 more judges to the Supreme Court. That would have clearly gotten him the majority he wanted. Now, the reorganization of the court. Chief Justice Charles Evan Hughes and Robert Owens joined the Liberal so that those revolving judges quit revolving and just became liberal. Upheld the Washington's minimum wage law, the Wagner Act, and the Social Security Act because he was really afraid that the Social Security Act would be declared unconstitutional, as well as the law mandating a minimum wage. Justice Vandiver retired and was replaced by Hugo Black, the first of the 5 liberal justices appointed by Roosevelt to form the Roosevelt Court that dominated his second term. Now, here are some of the other things that they will promote as the New Deal comes to an end. Roosevelt decides that in 1938, that he will try and purge the Democratic Party of politicians who oppose him. Remember, he couldn't get his Judicial Act through because even the Democrats were not on board with it. Vice President Nance Gardner of Georgia, who believed that being vice president wasn't worth a bucket of spit. He didn't like being vice president. And then Roosevelt won't retire at the end of his second term to give him a chance to be president. He heads a coalition of Southern Democrats that opposes Roosevelt. They wanted a balanced budget, angered at Roosevelt's support of anti-lynching laws, I guess because the Southerners want to lynch people every once in a while, and rescinding the 2/3 rule for nominating presidents. That is an interesting thing. You know, they used to have this rule that when you were nominated for president, you had to get 2/3 of a majority at the convention. And there have been many opportunities where a person who had, let's say, 2/3 is 66%. You need to have 66, 67% in order to be nominated. And there have been several cases in history where the leading candidate, let's say, had 57% of the vote on the first ballot, and then on the second ballot, and on the third ballot, and then realized, oh, by the way, on the fourth ballot, this man is never going to get more than 57%. He may be enough to, he has over half, but he doesn't have 2/3, and it doesn't look like anyone is coming to his aid. And then by the 5th ballot or the 6th ballot, then they start nominating people who came without ever having any thought of being president. And there are presidents like Franklin Pierce, James Knox Polk, the guy that was assassinated getting on the train in 1880. Anyway, whoever that was, he was only president for 3 months, so I can forget his name. But he was maybe hoping to be vice president. He wasn't planning on being president, and he wasn't even nominated first until like the 9th ballot or 10th ballot. And then eventually everyone started stampeding to him, like, yeah, he's a great guy. It's a good compromise. He's like everyone's second choice. And then he's just swept in, and then he's president. So they decided to do away with that. It made the conventions a lot less dramatic and less likely that a convention would go to the second ballot. And I forget which convention it was, either the Republican or the Democrat. The last time that they were nominating, there was some talk of the convention having to go to a second ballot because there weren't enough votes to nominate on the first. And it was like the first time in like 55 or 60 years that a presidential nominating convention was not able to nominate someone on the first ballot. Roosevelt recruited candidates to oppose the Copperheads in an attempt to purge the party of conservatives. The only party that was effective made Roosevelt look like he wanted to be a dictator. And so this didn't always work, but he was truly trying to get rid of, and one of the people that he will try and purge out of the Democratic Party will be Harry S. Truman during this process, who will eventually be his vice president for his 4th term and succeeds him as president. The end of the New Deal. Republicans made strong gains in the congressional elections in 1938, but did not take control, but enough to let everyone know this kind of social renovation is not going to be popular anymore. The last 2 pieces of legislation were the Fair Labor Standards Act, and then there was the establishment of the House Committee on Un-American Activities. Now, the Fair Labor Standards Act established the federal minimum wage, started out at 25 cents an hour, then raised quickly to 50 cents an hour. And soon, it's going to be $100 an hour. Because I can't, if $20 an hour is fair, $100 an hour is even that much more fair. And I'm told that in some states where they've already raised the minimum wage to well over $20 an hour, it costs like a Big Mac Happy Meal or whatever, value meal is nearly $15 or $20 because of the amount of expense on labor. No wonder they have those kiosks where you can order your by yourself because they can't afford to hire human beings. You know, those machines, their hourly rate never goes up. Then, the House Committee for Un-American Activities conducted a campaign to root out communists. This was opposed by Roosevelt, but he was distracted by events in Europe. And this committee will continue into the 1950s and maybe even into the 1960s. And it's where both Presidents Kennedy and Nixon will become popular crusaders against communism by sitting on this committee and pushing the idea that we should be rooting out people who are not acting like communists from government, from the movie industry, the media, and various other things of that nature. Here, now I don't have it written here. It banned child labor. Here's a picture of some children working in a sewing factory. Because these little kids can get their hands in and do things that adults have trouble doing. But there were lots and lots of child labor, and many of these children would be injured and maimed for life. The law specifically exempted farms. You can hire kids to work on farms, and that's not affected by this law. Also, your own children can be made to work in your own family business at any age. But you need to be very much restricted child labor in the United States. And so in many places, you have to be 16 to work, in certain jobs 18, and so forth. in order to make sure that you are not going to give people a bad reputation. So, all right, so we are finished with this unit. And as we remember that on Friday, we have class early, like 11:30 or something like that. So that you don't forget to come until afterward. So the test is early. And does anyone want a paper test? Would you all use the test that's on the computer? I'm going to assume that your exuberant response to that question means that you don't want a paper test. That's good to know. Okay, great. Okay, so you may be you can be dismissed and I'll see you next time.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.